Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here again in Bilbao. This is my third trip. What the Mayor and the Minister said about the Basque Country is absolutely true. The food and wine just keep me coming back. So my brief was to give you an introduction into Airbnb as one of the more famous of the new eTourism companies that have emerged over the last few years. I will talk briefly about the origins of the company and why the idea of empowering places really resonates with us as a company. I'll talk a little bit about our growth and one of the reasons why I think we're seeing that growth. And I'll talk about the conversations and partnerships that we've started with governments across the world and here in Europe about how we can contribute to a 21st century idea of what tourism should be. So, just before I start, who in the audience has used Airbnb as a guest? Nice. Who has used Airbnb as a host? Yeah, a decent smattering of people. This is good news. So I won't dwell on how it all works for too long, because you all know what I'm talking about. Airbnb is the world's largest community-driven hospitality company. And while technology is what drives our business, the experience we provide and the product that we deliver is a very, very human one. We run a global online marketplace that connects people who have space in their homes with people who are looking for a unique place to stay. And we've become one of the iconic companies in the so-called sharing or collaborative economy, which is actually just a new name for a very old phenomenon, which is people sharing their stuff with other people. This was one of the first books to really delve into the phenomenon of the sharing economy, and it's already 6 years old, and so much has happened since this book was published back in 2010. And while collaborative models are growing in significance in a large number of industries, travel is one of the sectors that is seeing the largest number of these peer-to-peer models emerging. I know that some of you will be talking about the sharing economy again later on today. I think it's kind of easy to understand why travel is a great space for the sharing economy. A few years ago, the Anglo-Swiss philosopher Alain de Botton wrote a book called The Art of Travel, and he came to speak at our annual employee conference last year. And he did a talk, and he said a few things that really resonated with me as a regular traveller, not just for business. He talked about how the tourism model of the 20th century did a lot to democratise the availability of travel. Lots of people were able to travel that could never travel before. But it also did so much to remove us from the one reason that we all said we wanted to travel in the first place. And we all say that we want to travel for the culture. We want to understand the place that we're going to see. And Alain told us that culture exists in two places. It exists in dead objects and in living people. And that the 20th century model of industrial travel favoured the former and not the latter. How many of us have been to the Louvre and experienced this when we go and see the Mona Lisa? The most powerful reason for people to travel, the people, is probably the one thing that we're denied when we travel, except when we experience a taxi driver coming from the airport, and they really are a portal into a whole world of place and specificity. This idea chimed with me because at Airbnb we spend a lot of our time responding to our guests' desire to experience places just like the locals would, not like a tourist would, but like a local would. And our mission as a company is to create a world where people can feel they belong anywhere, that they don't want to go to Paris to do Paris. They want to live in Paris, even if it's just for a weekend. And that means real homes, real people, and real experiences. And it's that connection between people that makes the collaborative economy a really powerful way of empowering places. Just briefly, how did it start? Airbnb started in 2007. This is the original Air Bed and Breakfast, and you can still book it on the website today. It's in San Francisco, and it was a flat that was occupied by Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia, who founded the company. They moved here shortly after they graduated from design school, and they knew they wanted to start a business together, but they didn't know what that business would be. And while they figured out what that business would be, they ran out of money. And they realized that there was a design conference coming to San Francisco and that they could essentially use their apartment to make themselves a bit of money. They predicted that the hotels were going to be full. So they dug out some inflatable mattresses and set up the world's first air bed and breakfast. And that's what the company used to be called, Air Bed and Breakfast. They got a website up and running. They contacted some bloggers. And within a few hours, they had their first 3 guests, and here they are. Joe and Brian figured that they'd probably stumbled on the business they wanted to run. And they got their computer scientist friend, Nate, to come and move to San Francisco, and the business started. And it got off to a very, very slow start. I won't go into the details, but there was a period where they were selling breakfast cereal in order to try and keep the company going. But in the end, after being rejected by just about every investor in San Francisco, the company began to take off, and we've never looked back. So from 2008 and through 2009, the growth has been spectacular. This is the growth in listings on the site over the last few years. And what's been spectacular, really, is not just that we've gone from 0 to 2 million places to stay in just a short space of time, but the growth in Europe has been absolutely phenomenal. It's our largest region. More than 60% of the properties that you can rent are here in Europe. And looking at the Basque Country, there are currently about 1,600 active hosts in the Basque Country. I was hosted by one last night, and I'm just one of about 119,000 guests over the last year who have travelled to the Basque Country using Airbnb. The number of Airbnb guests coming to Europe has doubled every single year since 2008. And in 2015, more than half of the trips taken by Airbnb guests were either within or to Europe. So there are about 2 million places to stay, in 34,000 places, in 191 countries. The most recent one we've added is Cuba, which we opened up for the first time last year. And it's not just the number of hosts that has grown, our number of guests has grown exponentially as well. It took 4 years to get to 1 million guests, and we've just surpassed 70 million. 42 million of those were just in the last year alone. And as we rang in the new year, 1.3 million people were staying in an Airbnb on New Year's Eve in 17,500 places in 150 countries. And unsurprisingly, that was our biggest night ever. Back to the people, though. That's enough of the numbers. So why is this growing? One of the insights about the collaborative economy is how crucial trust is to making it all work. And like any business, we need to generate bonds of trust with our users. But we also need to build a platform and provide a space where hosts and guests can trust one another, even if they come from countries that are worlds apart. This is what one of our hosts, Jonathan, says about that bond of trust you build with your guests, that it's an evolutionary leap. We are reconnecting with one another and learning that we can trust one another, probably for the first time in many, many years. And there's a lot we do to generate that kind of trust, and I can talk about it later on today. And I won't go into it now, but it's things like insurance and safety programs and photography and the customer care we provide. But probably the most significant development is the peer review systems that we and other collaborative platforms have built. It provides a really powerful and very reliable reputation system for hosts and for guests, and they provide feedback to each other at the end of each stay, and they provide public feedback that gives new customers the ability to make some informed choices about where they want to stay or who they want to come and have stay in their home. And we refine this system all the time to make it as powerful as it can be. And last year we changed the system so that you don't get to see the other person's review until you've written one yourself, so they go up simultaneously. So why is this a foundation for empowering places? And I think the reason that all of this can empower places is because the foundations of the collaborative economy empower people and the people that live in those places. We spend a lot of time surveying and researching our global community of hosts and guests, and we publish many reports over the course of a year. The data is pretty consistent across all of the markets that we've surveyed. So just delving quickly into our community, 82% of our hosts share the home that they live in. Typical hosts are welcoming guests for just a few nights a year. Where I come from in the United Kingdom, a typical host hosts for about 46 nights a year. These are not professional tourism providers in the main. These are just people looking to make a bit of extra income from sharing the space that they live in. 52% of them are moderate to low income. Our guests are different as well. 89% of them say that they travelled using Airbnb because they wanted to live like a local would. And 79% of them specifically chose to stay in a neighbourhood that they wanted to explore. And that impact is important. 74% of our properties are beyond the usual hotel districts. That's one of the reasons why I don't think this presents an existential threat to the rest of the tourism business. And 42% of guest spending is actually in the neighbourhood where somebody stays. And that makes a big difference. This is San Francisco, and all of the dark dots on this map are a hotel, and all of the light green dots are an Airbnb listing. That's somebody staying in a home, spending money in that neighbourhood. And you can really see how this kind of travel spreads tourism interest across a much, much wider level. The hosts say a lot of things about why they host, and in fact, 3 of the comments on this sheet, these are comments from some of our hosts in Ireland. 3 of them are talking about the extra money that they make, but one of them in particular raises a theme that comes up again and again in our conversations with hosts, which is that it reconnects her with her local area. She finds herself recommending local places to go, and she acts as a concierge for her local area. And that's a really, really powerful benefit for this kind of travel. And that idea of activating a community in service of its local area is the key to many of the partnerships with governments and with tourism authorities that we've already brokered all around the world. I'm just going to outline a few of them for you. Amsterdam was the first city in the world, as far as we know, to enact specific legislation to enable people to share their homes. And since then, we've worked in very, very close partnership with the city to help our community understand the rules, comply with them, and we are now collecting tourist tax on behalf of our hosts in the city. The process of collecting or remitting tourist taxation is something that we're doing in a growing number of cities all around the world. Just yesterday, in fact, we sent the city of Paris a cheque for 1.2 million euros, which represents the amount of tourist tax we generated in the final 3 months of last year. In Amsterdam, because the tourist tax rate is quite high, we're sending about €500,000 every month to the city of Amsterdam. And we're building on that cooperation. We now have an emerging partnership with iAmsterdam, which is the tourism board, who are using our community as a way of educating guests and informing guests about things that are going on in the city and where they might want to go and things that they might want to see. Closer to my home in London, we're doing a really exciting partnership with the Greater London Authority. One of their big tourism strategies relates to cultural tourism and spreading and dispersing tourists outside the congested inner London boroughs to go and see things that happen outside London. And why did they come to us? Well, they came to us because our community in London skews quite heavily towards people in the creative industries, but also because so much of our growth in London has been in the outer areas of London. It's growing much faster than the centre of London. We worked on a survey for thousands of our hosts to help get an insight into how they direct people to cultural institutions in their area and to other local businesses. So 80% of our hosts in London say that they specifically recommend their favourite local restaurant or cafe to their guests. And we will be launching that survey at an event in City Hall in February, and we've established with the Greater London Authority a council of hosts to advise them on their cultural tourism strategy. So we're really working closely in partnership with them. In San Francisco, we did something similar. We worked with hosts to crowdsource maps of every district, not just the ones that get heavily touristed, to provide neighborhood maps with local recommendations. Every host in San Francisco has a copy of this map in their listing, and these maps are available at the official San Francisco visitor centers too. Tel Aviv took that to the next level. We worked with them to establish an online guide to all of the neighborhoods in Tel Aviv that you can search depending on your particular preferences and the kinds of place that you want to stay. And we used our expertise in design and photography to really showcase all of those neighborhoods so that potential visitors can pick somewhere that's really going to fit for them. Back across the Atlantic in Brooklyn, we've worked with the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce to help small businesses in that borough of New York understand how big tourism is becoming in their area. This is not something they've ever really cared about before or thought about, but there is now a huge community of Airbnb hosts and Airbnb guests on their doorstep that they can tap into. So we've done meetings and events with local businesses to help explain what this is all about and how they can benefit from it. Back across the Atlantic again, into Milan. Last year, the Expo was top of the agenda, and we have concluded an agreement with the City of Milan to help them when they're hosting big events. This was a big interactive billboard we did for the Expo last year, but this year we're going to be supporting Milan Design Week, again, by activating our community of hosts as ambassadors and concierges for the city. And finally, to Brazil, and this obviously is the biggest of all big events. Last year, in fact, the year before, time goes so fast, in 2014, the Football World Cup pushed Brazil's tourist accommodation to the very limit. And they reached out to us to try and build some supply in places where the hotels just hadn't been built fast enough. And we were able to work very quickly to grow our community fast and provide huge amounts of accommodation for the international guests that travel to Brazil, across Brazil, for the Football World Cup. And this year we are an official accommodation provider to the Rio Olympics. And last time I checked, which was only a couple of months ago, we already had bookings from guests from more than 50 countries coming to Rio for the Olympics, and they were staying and are going to stay in about 36 different neighborhoods in Rio. Support with big events is one of the most powerful uses of the collaborative economy platforms to scale up capacity where it's really needed. The Olympics are clearly a uniquely monster event, but we've done many other things in other places, things as unique as the Pope's visit to Philadelphia, and helping a small city in the west of England who wanted to become a hub for people to stay when they visited England for the Rugby World Cup last year. So I've given you a taster of how quickly we're growing, especially in Europe, and I hope I've shown you that this growth potentially creates huge opportunities for towns, cities, regions, and whole countries to think creatively about how they attract guests, and especially in areas that have never really cared much about tourism before, but now have new opportunities that have been brought by collaborative travel. The existence of people-to-people models in travel really is a fantastic way of connecting people to the excitement of the tourism industry and showing off the place that they live and opening their homes to new friends from all across the world. You can read more about what's going on in our community at a website that's called airbnbaction.com. And if you have any fantastic ideas of how we can work with places that you know to help activate these kinds of benefits, do please feel free to send us an email at sharemycity@airbnb.com. We're really excited about what more we can do, so don't hesitate to get in touch. Thank you for listening this morning. I wish you all a stimulating and exciting day, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Patrick. And we have time for, before we go to the next one, we have time for a few questions from the audience.
Hi, Patrick. Thank you for your contribution. My name is Dimitris Bouchalis from Bournemouth University. Increasingly, we see professional Airbnb landlords that they're running 150 properties and they've got a capacity of 500, 600 people. They're basically small hoteliers competing with the mainstream hospitality market. How are you responding to that? Because this is not your average guy who's got a room or a spare flat somewhere.
Yeah, I think it's important to think about where this activity is going on. Clearly, in very crowded, dense cities, the typical host really is just doing the place that they live in. We know that Airbnb is becoming a powerful platform for professionals in traditional holiday markets and who have holiday lettings to be able to access new audiences and reach new people. And we think a lot about whether that is the kind of activity that we want to be facilitating. We really do want to be providing guests with something unique. And to the extent that people are providing a genuinely authentic local experience, that is something that we're comfortable with. But I think, we need to think very, very locally about what's right for the community, what's right for the city, and what's right for guests. And so there are many places where that is not an appropriate use of the platform, and we're taking action to address that.
Other questions?
Hello. Whoa, that works. Hi, Patrick. Chris from Ryerson University in Toronto. Talk to us about some of the stuff you've done to grow the business traveler, because that's a rather recent development, and where you see that going.
That's right. We identified business travellers as a potential area of interest last year and have done quite a lot, not just in partnering with some of the big corporate booking platforms who are looking for places to put executives and travellers who might be looking to stay for a week or 2 weeks or even longer. But we've now increasingly been working with our host community to get them ready for the idea of business travellers who have very specific needs. So, again, working with hosts to help them understand the kinds of amenities that they might need to provide and to get themselves ready as business travellers. Many of the booking platforms and the companies want a subset of properties available rather than just allowing people to stay anywhere that they like. It's obviously up to the company to decide what policy they put in place. But yes, this is a growing segment of the market. But I don't think we're setting out on this with the expectation that we're going to become a complete replacement for hotels for business travellers, people who are travelling for one night, who might be checking in late, checking out in the morning, who want room service. There's clearly still a huge market for people who want business travel, as it always has been, but we just recognise that there is an opportunity to reach a new segment of traveller that wants a slightly different experience when they travel on business, and we're developing that side of our business slowly, and we're doing it thoughtfully, and we'll see where it goes.
Me now, Joseph Margarete, Innsbruck, Austria. We can go along with your philosophy very much, and you have touched an area of tourism which was actually the origin of tourism, like 150 years ago when there was no hotels. Homestays, staying with local people was the start of tourism in many places. I remember Greek people taking me from the harbor back to their homes, room for you, sir. And now you have put it on internet, so congratulations to that. I think there's another rocket ahead of you, but there's all these troubles with rules and regulations around. Also in our country, we still have about 1/3 of Tirol's tourism with 12 million arrivals every year. 1/3 is still with homestays, bed and breakfast, private places. And so this starts now mixing with your way of getting people connected. But there is the big question of how to regulate that in a way that it's fair play with all the other parts of the industry and that it's secure for the consumer, because you have no securities, fire security, whatever. There's no issues like that to be seen in your business. So we hopefully can together get that on a safe road, because I think the basic idea was always there and was always the right idea. I have another question now, which is, are you connecting your business with other sharing economies?
The answer to that is yes, and it depends on where we are. We've tried a number of partnerships with people offering similar linked services. Recently, we've been working with a company called Trip for Real. If you travel to Barcelona with us, after you've booked your place, you will get offered perhaps a tour guide or somebody to come and show you around the city. There are a number of ways that we can connect with other sharing economy enterprises to provide services for tourists, because we recognise that people are eventually going to want more than just the accommodation. They're probably going to want other experiences while they travel. Actually, we are working very closely with other companies in the sharing economy more broadly in some emerging associations that are tackling many of the regulatory issues that you've just talked about. I think I agree with you on the regulation front, and it's where I spend 95% of my time, is talking to governments and regulators about how this all works and how it should be regulated. And the fundamental challenge here is that there is this erosion between professional and non-professional activity, where I can live somewhere for 50 weeks of the year, and then I go away for 2 weeks and somebody comes and stays in my home. There are some jurisdictions in Europe that would regard me as suddenly, genuinely, I've become a hotelier for those 2 weeks, and I need to fulfill all of the obligations that a hotel would. There are other jurisdictions, my own hometown, for example, where that's not the case. And we are gradually learning with city after city and region after region and government after government what's right for that particular mix, and how we can find something that is appropriate and proportionate for people who are just sharing their homes occasionally, as well as finding fair rules for professionals. I think many of the issues that we face and that the tourism industry faces is sometimes over-regulation in many areas, and some of the areas of common interest with the hotels is sometimes in having a look at an issue like fire safety and saying, I think the world has moved on an awfully long way in the last 30 years. You know, safety standards have become far higher, particularly in construction, that, you know, maybe there's a different way of looking at things that allows for a more level playing field. But let's be clear that we've always been comfortable as consumers and as businesses with the notion that different things are regulated differently. If I want to travel from London to Edinburgh, I could go on a train, I could fly, I could go in somebody's car, I could go on a bus. I, as a consumer, know and appreciate that the regulations that apply to those things are very different. I will be able to expect a different kind of service from an aeroplane, from British Airways, than I will from National Express, the coach operator. So, although it's all in the same market, there are appropriate regulations that apply in each case. And I think that's the emerging consensus across Europe now, is that we need to find a way of identifying, regulating and legitimising this activity in a way that doesn't stifle it too quickly.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, just one more in the back.
I'll answer it quickly, I promise.
Okay, go ahead, sorry.
Thank you, Patrick. My name is Lan Yao from the University of Queensland. I happen to know that Airbnb is launching, just came into Chinese market in August last year. So my question is, do you know if your team is experiencing any barriers in developing Airbnb in China? And what's your overall strategy of developing Airbnb in China? Thank you.
It's a good question. It's not something I know a vast amount about, but what I do know is that our focus in China is helping actually outbound travel, helping Chinese travelers to experience the world, in this way. So our focus really is in providing options for Chinese travelers when they go to Japan, Korea, Hong Kong, come to Europe, and really developing a platform and a service that is appropriate to their needs and their preferences. Operating in China is complex and difficult, and I think there will be some bumps in the road ahead, but it's an incredibly exciting market to be in, and we know that outbound Chinese travelers are a really important growth area for us, and a really great opportunity for our host communities all around the world.